for three. Dagger!
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another special edition of Well Beyond the Arc. I'm Manoli.
And I'm Montana.
And we will be taking you through part 2 of our 2-part series, analyzing Bleacher Report's GOATs for each of the 30 NBA teams. In part 1, we went through team by team from the Atlanta Hawks through the Memphis Grizzlies in alphabetical order. And now part 2 will be taking you through Milwaukee Bucks through the Washington Wizards. So teams 16 through 30. Montana, let's just dive in, all right?
Absolutely.
Next team on our list is the Milwaukee Bucks, the defending world champions. Been around since the late 60s. Bleacher Report has Giannis Antetokounmpo as the team's GOAT. Any issue with the Greek Freak, or are you replacing him with another Bucks legend?
So another Bucks legend that is definitely in the conversation would be Kareem, but I am going to stick with Giannis. I also think, now this is speaking more predicting the future, which I know no one can really do, especially in professional sports, but I am definitely sitting here saying Giannis is going to win himself 1 or 2 more championships as a Buck. And so when we talk about impact once it's all said and done, Kareem obviously won 1, but he really didn't spend that much of his career with the Bucks. Giannis is still a decently young player, and so he's spent all of his season or career with them as of now, but that could change. But I'm going to give it to Giannis because what he's done in the short amount of time he's been there, plus what I think he will do, solidifies him. But Kareem is right there at second for me on that list.
Yeah, this one was tougher than I thought for me. Giannis Antetokounmpo is now the Milwaukee Bucks all-time leading scorer. Both Antetokounmpo and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar have one championship to their names. Kareem accomplished a lot in a little bit of shorter time, but I'm going to stick with the Greek Freak. I mean, he's got 2 MVPs, an All-Star Game MVP, Defensive Player of the Year award, Most Improved Player award. I mean, his trophy case is stacked, and he's not done yet. So, again, the all-time leading scorer in that franchise's history, and no issue here. And I just realized I can't use the alphabet correctly. We did skip the Miami Heat, so we'll go to the Miami Heat next. Bleacher Report has Dwyane Wade as that team's GOAT, that organization's GOAT, that is. A few players have gone through that organization and made an impact, but Montana, has anyone else worthy of the GOAT of the Miami Heat, that title?
This is another one that I think isn't even close. I think Dwyane Wade is on that mountaintop, and he's on it pretty decently well because, yes, LeBron James, Chris Bosh, Shaquille O'Neal, we've seen other legendary players come through and play, but if you take Dwyane Wade off of any of those championship-winning or successful teams, I don't think you find the same success. That was Dwyane Wade's organization the entire time. He had that weird little stint with the Bulls that everyone seems to forget about. But other than that, he was Miami. I'm sure that's a lot of hype with that one that was built up. But no, I would definitely say that you take him off of if all of those teams he was on that were successful and they don't have the same success. He was a leader for that team. Even when you had a player like LeBron, who definitely likes to be that guy and be that leader, Dwyane Wade was still the leader there. He was the guy that was running the show. So Dwyane Wade, I think, has solidified himself without a doubt in that GOAT position.
Yeah, I mean, it is Wade County. I'm pretty sure the name existed before he got to Miami. And yes, I do remember the year he spent with the Bulls. Decent year, but no. Yeah, no, look, there's nobody else. I did write down a couple names. I'll take you through them here. I mean, obviously, LeBron James spent 4 years there, 2 titles. You have Alonzo Mourning, Tim Hardaway, Thunder Dan Marley. Okay, I just want to put that in for a buddy of mine. Glenn Rice. And there have been a couple other guys. I mean, Jimmy Butler's with the team now. But no, it's Dwyane Wade. It's one of those where we say Dwyane Wade and everybody else. 3 championships, a Finals MVP, scoring title, a franchise all-time leading scorer. I mean, the Miami Heat franchise is Dwyane Wade. Dwyane Wade is the Miami Heat. Let's move on to the next team. Next team is the Minnesota Timberwolves, in existence since the late 80s. Bleacher Report has Kevin Garnett as that team's GOAT. Are we really looking for another name here, Montana, or are we sticking with Kevin Garnett?
Sticking with Kevin Garnett. Honestly, this is another organization that was mediocre directly after he left. His impact on that organization shows, because until this season, I don't think they made the playoffs in 2018 when they had Derrick Rose. And then they didn't make it until this season.
Butler.
And then before then, they didn't make it after Kevin Garnett. So Kevin Garnett's impact on that team shows with how steeply and quickly they fell off once he left. So it by far not even close.
Yeah, no, it's, again, just like we said with, I think it's even more egregious here where it's Kevin Garnett and everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you had a couple players that went through there, but Kevin Garnett basically leads that team in every statistical category all time. Farthest Timberwolves have got to is the conference finals in 1 year, and that was Kevin Garnett's MVP season where they ran into your Lakers when the Lakers had Kobe, Shaq, Karl Malone, and Gary Payton. Yeah, this one's Kevin Garnett, unless Karl Anthony Towns, and who knows, Anthony Edwards down the line might have this title, but no, it's KG all day long. All right, we move on to the New Orleans Pelicans, and this one's an interesting one because as their time as the New Orleans Hornets, this will count as coming up with the GOAT for New Orleans. So just think the GOAT for the New Orleans basketball franchise. Bleacher Report has Chris Paul as their GOAT. We had Chris Paul as the GOAT for the Los Angeles Clippers, but he comes up again. Montana, any issues with Chris Paul? CP3 is the GOAT of the Pelicans, or anybody else on your mind?
No, I definitely think he earned it. Like I said earlier, he is arguably could be in the running for the GOAT for a couple of teams. This was that other team that I was referencing. I think he is the GOAT. I will say Anthony Davis, had he stayed there a little bit longer and stayed a little bit healthier in his time there, may have overtaken that. AD put up some monster numbers in New Orleans. But when we're talking about impact and consistency, Chris Paul has both of those things checked off. So I give it to Chris Paul, with Anthony Davis a close second.
Yeah, I wrote down a couple of names. The other ones really don't matter. I think we need to go to, between Chris Paul and AD. AD spent a little bit more time than Chris Paul, but I agree. I think Chris Paul had a bigger impact in the city of New Orleans, led them farther in the playoffs. I don't think AD got out of the first round with the Pelicans. We mentioned earlier Chris Paul made it to the conference finals with David West in that New Orleans Hornets team, and I believe the 08-09 season. Might be off by a year or so, but no, I completely agree. Chris Paul with the AD a close second. All right, next team up, we may have a little bit of debate. We may not. I feel like I say that with every team we cover here, but that's the New York Knicks. The New York Knicks, according to Bleacher Report, their GOAT, chosen by Bleacher Report, is Patrick Ewing. Montana, is it Patrick Ewing for you, or are you going to throw another curveball with I don't know, Greg Anthony or Bill Cartwright? Anybody else on your list?
So I don't agree with their pick. I will admit the Knicks is a little bit tricky because this is an organization that is so iconic, but how many championships do they have as an organization? You know what? Yeah. So they're on this level.
Two.
I feel like people put them up with the Celtics and the Lakers, just with iconic organizations. But they have two. They have two. About 16 less. No, excuse me. 15 less than the Lakers.
15 less than the Lakers and the Celtics.
I'm trying to give the Lakers and the Celtics a championship they don't have, apparently. But anyway, so yes, a little bit less than what the Celtics and the Lakers have. So those actual iconic franchises. But when we think about a player that I believe was the GOAT, I'm giving it to Walt Frazier. He by far was the best guard in Knicks history, and his championship success and just what he was able to do with that team in his time, I'm going to give it to him over Patrick Ewing. Patrick Ewing obviously was a monster player in the NBA, but he could never get it done. He always had his playoff and championship hopes crushed by plenty of other teams and plenty of other players. So he could never get it done, put up some monster stats, but when I think about GOATs, I'm going to give it to Walt Frazier.
Yeah, it's not a bad pick. I mean, I'm torn on this one, to be honest with you. I wrote down a name, but I'm still going back and forth as I start my explanation here. So I'll tell you the names I wrote down. I have Patrick Ewing, I have Walt Frazier, I have Carmelo Anthony, and I have Willis Reed. Carmelo Anthony, I quickly scratched off. So it's between for me, it's Ewing, Frazier, and Willis Reed. So Willis Reed and Walt Frazier were teammates on those Knicks championship teams. They played together since the late '60s and into the mid '70s. Um, Knicks won championships, I believe, in 1970 and 1972. Everybody remembers the Willis Reed game where he came out, I believe, with a torn quad and warmed up against the Lakers. And he just scored 2 outside jumpers, and the Lakers were just deflated. They were shocked to see him there. So it's hard for me to pick against Willis Reed. I think Walt Frazier is a good pick as well for the same reasons. Um, we talk about greatness. So as a team's GOAT, for me, there's a bunch of different criteria. There's stats, there's impact, there's rings, there's winning, and longevity with a specific franchise here. Willis Reed and Walt Clyde Frazier spent 10 years with the Knicks, 2 championships. I am, and this may be a controversial pick, I'm going with Patrick Ewing barely. 15 seasons in New York, statistical leader in most of the categories, including rebounds and points and blocks primarily. Made it to 2 NBA finals, although the one he was injured did not play in. He was injured on that playoff run. I value winning over the other things, but I feel like Patrick Ewing, just for as long as he was there, yeah, he didn't get the Knicks over the hump, but man, he had them competitive and had them close a couple of times. I'm not mad at the Walt Frazier pick, but for me, I got Ewing and barely.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, that's an organization that, just like the Lakers and the Celtics, we could make a whole team of GOATs. So that team
Yep.
has quite a few players that fill that up, but definitely not a
Yeah.
bad pick either way.
I'm just happy you didn't say John Starks. If you would have said John Starks, I hated John Starks in the 90s. I would have gotten up and just left and you would have done the podcast by yourself. Anyway, next is the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, Oklahoma City, the Oklahoma City Thunder's been in that state and city since, I believe, 2008, where they moved from the Seattle Supersonics. We can go one of two ways, Montana. We can say who's the GOAT since they moved to Oklahoma City. That franchise does own all of the stats from the Seattle Supersonics. Now, granted, if Seattle gets an expansion team and brings the Supersonics back, they take those stats back.
Mhm.
But I have 3 names down. Bleacher Report has Kevin Durant, which I'm not totally upset with, but there's 2 others that I think we can make an argument for.
Mhm.
Montana, is it KD for you, or do you have somebody else?
It's not KD. I can see KD. I'm not mad at that. Obviously, Kevin Durant was explosive and was putting up monster numbers in Oklahoma, but I'm giving it to Westbrook. The guy was super loyal to that organization, and even after James Harden, Kevin Durant, we see they're losing all their players. It goes one by one. Russell Westbrook stayed until the very end, and he led those teams to decently successful seasons without Kevin Durant. So I'm giving it to Westbrook. I mean, the guy was averaging a triple double. So I'm going to give it to Russell Westbrook because he was dominating the league and taking those teams that were maybe viewed as underachieving and taking them at least to the playoffs. He never took them that far without Kevin Durant. Never got the job done with Kevin Durant, but still, when I think about faces of the franchise, I'm going to give that to Russell Westbrook.
Yeah, I'd ask the Oklahoma City Thunder fans who their favorite player is. Do they prefer Westbrook or do they prefer Durant? Now, granted, they'll give Durant his due. When his career is said and done, they retire his jersey there in Oklahoma City. So I have 3 names. I have Westbrook, just like you. I have Durant, and I have Gary Payton, taking that from the Seattle Supersonics days. Stats alone, it's, you have Westbrook leading the franchise in points, second in assists. Gary Payton, second in points, first in assists and steals. Westbrook spent 11 seasons in Oklahoma City, to your point. Gary Payton, I believe, spent 12 seasons in Seattle before getting traded off to Milwaukee in that Ray Allen trade in the early 2000s. For me, I agree with you. It's Russell Westbrook. more so for longevity. I mean, they didn't win a championship without the other in Oklahoma City. You mentioned the averaging of triple doubles. They both have one MVP to their name. Yeah, KD has them in scoring titles, even though Westbrook does have a scoring title with Oklahoma City. But for me, it's Westbrook, but barely. So I think we both agree, and we both agree that Bleacher Report got it wrong on this one. So, all right, next one that I believe will have a little bit of debate is the Orlando Magic. They've been around since the late 1980s, have had a few guys, great players pass through, but as a member of the Orlando Magic, they have Penny Hardaway as that franchise's GOAT. Great player. I personally have somebody else, but Montana, who do you have as the Orlando Magic GOAT?
Well, my pick is potentially not going to be one that a couple people might expect. I'm going to go with Dwight Howard.
Okay.
Obviously, Penny Hardaway, legendary player, helped lead that 90s Magic team to a lot of success. Obviously, that expansion team, when they started, they were really bottom of the pack. Well, Penny Hardaway helped explode them and move them up, and then Shaq just made them even better, and then they were that dominating duo. Super fun to watch. I'm giving it to Dwight Howard because Dwight Howard was a very, very, very consistent player. 18.3 points per game, 12.9 rebounds per game, 1.5 assists per game, 2.2 blocks per game. That is one of the most consistent and efficient players that I have ever seen because he could do it on both ends of the ball. He was putting up monster numbers with rebounding, and he was a multi-defensive player of the year winner with this Orlando Magic team. Not to mention making the finals. Obviously, Kobe Bryant and the Lakers handled business pretty easily, but making that game and making that series with that team after having so much of a drop off since the Shaq and Penny days, I'm giving it to Dwight Howard. I think overall he's the most well-rounded and successful player that franchise has seen. And personally, I think he led them to the most success as well. I think he kept them in the conversation in his time there. I mean, he was there from 2004 to 2012, so he was there for a pretty solid amount of time. And in that time, they were always a team to talk about.
Yeah. You said that people aren't going to expect you to say Dwight Howard. Well, let's make it a twofer. I'm going to have a Dwight Howard as well. I will go through a couple names here, but Dwight Howard is my pick. But others in consideration, yes, I did consider Penny Hardaway. If he would have stayed healthy, maybe that's the name we go with, but he didn't, unfortunately. So I have Dwight Howard, Shaquille O'Neal, Penny Hardaway, Tracy McGrady, and Nikola Vucevic. I didn't realize that Nikola Vucevic was up the Orlando Magic all-time leaderboards, but I don't think he's ever got past the first round with Orlando, so I quickly scratched him off the list. Tracy McGrady may be the most talented player to ever play for the Orlando Magic. He was there for 4 seasons, just like Shaquille O'Neal. We'll get to that in a second. 2-time scoring champ, but didn't get out of the first round. So I can't go with T-Mac either. Penny, I didn't agree with. We talked about the injury, so that brings it down to Dwight Howard and Shaquille O'Neal. Now, if you're telling me who's the better player between Shaquille O'Neal and Dwight Howard, it's Shaq all day long. I don't think anyone would argue that. However, in the time that both players have spent in the Orlando Magic uniform, both players made the same number of NBA Finals. That's 1. Both of them have the same number of rings. That's 0. Shaq spent 4 seasons there, 4 dominating seasons, put the Orlando Magic on the map along with Penny Hardaway that time. But I also have to give it to Dwight Howard. Spent 8 seasons there, 6-time All-Star, leads the franchise in points, rebounds, and blocks, and won 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards. Shaq has a scoring title, no MVPs, no Finals MVPs, no Defensive Player of the Year awards. So it's Dwight Howard barely, but yeah, I'm with you, Dwight Howard. So Bleacher Report, we're challenging you on that one as well. All right. Next up on our list is the Philadelphia 76ers, a long and storied franchise. Was once the Syracuse Nationals, then became the Philadelphia 76ers. So they've been around for quite a long time. Bleacher Report has their GOAT as Allen Iverson. Not upset with the pick, but I think it's worth some discussion. So Montana, is it AI or somebody else in your opinion?
So I'm going with Dr. J. Obviously, I took that title away from him. Bleacher Report had him as the Brooklyn Nets. I'm going to go with the 76ers. I think when we're looking at NBA success, I'm going to give it to him. Allen Iverson, one of the most entertaining players to ever watch. His crossovers are legendary. Obviously led that 76ers team to the finals, but could not get it done against the Lakers. Well, Julius Irving led the 76ers to a championship and could get it done. He did get it done. He won a championship. That is a storied piece of 76er history. Allen Iverson is up there, obviously. When it's all said and done, I think if Joel Embiid can get a better cast of characters around him, he may also find himself in the conversation eventually. Time will tell with that, but I'm going to give it to Julius Irving because I think that he really is the face of that franchise. And also, it's not all just about championships, but when we look at championships, he brought one to that organization. Allen Iverson made a really good push for one, but he really only made that push once and never really made it back there again. So I'm going to give it to Dr. J because not only did he bring the stats, he also brought the championship.
Yeah, this one was tough for me, tougher than I thought. At first, I saw Iverson and I said, no. But it's a lot closer than what you think if you look at the numbers, the accolades, and everything side by side. So there's a name that a lot of people might not have ever heard of that I wrote down. In fact, I'll just go through the 6 names. I wrote down 6 names for the 76ers. That's a lot. I wrote down Wilt Chamberlain, even though a lot of his career wasn't technically with the Philadelphia 76ers. It was more so Philadelphia Warriors, Lakers, etc. I wrote down Allen Iverson. I wrote down Charles Barkley, Dr. J, and Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid hasn't been around as much. I think he's only went to one conference finals, and that was last year. Not much in his trophy case other than some All-Star game appearances, so Embiid is quickly off the list for me. Charles Barkley, I don't think ever made it to an Eastern Conference Finals as a 76er as the leading man. Spent 8 seasons in Philly, 6-time All-Star, great player, but take him off the list. Did you know that Hal Greer is the all-time leading scorer in the history of the Philadelphia 76ers franchise? 15 seasons, 10 All-Star games, a championship. So I actually heavily considered Hal Greer, but that's not the name I went with. Allen Iverson, 12 seasons in Philly, 4-time scoring champion, 7-time All-Star, Rookie of the Year, 2-time All-Star MVP, second all-time in Philadelphia 76ers scoring. I really, really wanted to pick AI. I did. However, I went with Dr. J just like you did. Dr. J and Allen Iverson have the same number of regular season MVP awards, and that is 1. It's the ring and the impact that Dr. J had as a 76er that barely put Dr. J over the top for me. So I'm with you. We're both not with Bleacher Report once again. So I think we're in agreement. Dr. J is the GOAT in our opinion for the Philadelphia 76ers. Definitely. All right. Now we move on to a team that this might be one of the tougher ones on the list to determine who the GOAT is, and that is the Phoenix Suns. Phoenix Suns have been around since, I believe, 1967. A lot of players have played in Phoenix, some not for a long time. If you go through their career stats, their leaderboards, there's some names that you may not have heard of. Walter Davis is their leading scorer of all time. I don't know if a lot of people even know who Walter Davis is, but that's just who it is. Alvin Adams is second, but then you see a bunch of names that you recognize. But Bleacher Report has Steve Nash as the GOAT for the Phoenix Suns. Montana, is that who you have, or do you have somebody else?
Steve Nash is obviously up there, but I'm going to give it to Charles Barkley. And the reason I'm going to give it to Barkley is the stats that he was averaging on the Suns often goes overlooked, but he was having some of the best statistical seasons in NBA history. Obviously, he has made a name for himself more with his on-screen appearance now and some of the antics and takes that he gives nowadays, but he could hoop when he played on that Suns team. His averages were 23.4 points per game, 11.5 rebounds per game, 4.4 assists per game, and 1.6 steals per game. That is incredibly consistent. He was right at 50% for shooting. He was hard work. He was efficient. I don't think we're going to see a player that put up more efficient numbers across the board, especially in that Suns organization. You know, you could argue Kevin Johnson, you could argue Sean Marion, you could argue Amari Stoudemire, but I think Charles Barkley is up there because, yes, Steve Nash has the MVPs. Yes, Steve Nash was putting up monster numbers, especially in that point guard position. But Barkley was a lot more of a stat machine overall. Both of them were stat machines. You know, Steve Nash was putting up monster numbers between points and assists, but Barkley was putting up numbers all the way across the board. So I'm going to give it to Barkley, but again, I'm thinking about Stoudemire, I'm thinking about Sean Marion, I'm thinking about a couple other players, but I think definitely Barkley has solidified himself to me in that position.
Yeah, this one was tough for me. For me, when I look at the GOAT of a franchise, I look for someone that has won, who, has the stats, is up on the stat leaderboards, has made an impact, rings, has been competitive, all-star game appearances, things of that nature, and somebody whose jersey is going to get retired, right? If not already retired. A lot of names on that, that we could have went with: Amari Stoudemire, the Matrix, Sean Marion, Thunder Dan Marley, someone that's been a fan favorite in Phoenix. Luckily, he was able to retire there. For me, it came down to Kevin Johnson, up there, some of the older guys like Alvin Adams, Walter Davis, guys like that, Paul Westphal. It came down to Nash and Barkley for me, and I flip-flopped 4 or 5 times on this one. I agree with a lot of what you said with Barkley. The minute he got traded to Phoenix, Phoenix was a serious contender. He was already added to that loaded team with Kevin Johnson and Dan Marley. Cedric Ceballos, Richard Dumas came out as a great rookie that year. Barkley did lead the team to one finals appearance. Didn't get a ring, and I went with Steve Nash barely over Barkley. 2-time MVP, went to multiple Western Conference finals. Yes, he didn't get to the finals. If Barkley would have won a ring with Phoenix, it would be Barkley all day long for me. But for me, it's Steve Nash. Spent 10 seasons with the Suns. Their all-time assists leader, 2-time MVP, like we mentioned, 6-time All-Star. Barkley was there for 4 seasons. There were 4 great seasons. But for me, it's Nash's longevity and just a couple more accolades that did it for me.
Yeah, and again, this is another organization that has most of these organizations have plenty of players in the mix. I think the Suns are maybe not looked at as an organization that would have more than a couple players in the mix, but there's definitely a couple names up there in the mix for this position.
Sure. All right, we move on to the Portland Trailblazers. Portland Trailblazers GOAT, according to Bleacher Report, is Damian Lillard. I'll be honest, I was surprised. I'm a big fan of Damian Lillard.
Mm-hmm.
Love me some Damian Lillard. One of the more underrated players in the NBA. Unfortunately, he was out for most of the season with injury. Got his backcourt teammate CJ McCollum traded, and for the first time in a while, the Trailblazers are going to be in the lottery. This wasn't the pick for me here, but Montana, who did you have as the GOAT for Portland instead of Damian Lillard? Because I see you're shaking your head.
Well, I was honestly surprised to see him on this list. I think Lillard is definitely up there for players that would be in the mix, but I would not have him as the GOAT. I would have Clyde Drexler as the GOAT for this organization. He was putting up monster numbers. I mean, there were multiple seasons in a row that this man was averaging 27 points a game. And to average multiple seasons in a row, 27 points a game at that time was not super common. We had a few players that were putting up big numbers scoring wise, but you also have to remember the actual scoring itself was different in the 80s and 90s when Clyde came up. So he was putting up monster numbers at one of the hardest positions to score at in the 80s and 90s. So I'm going to give it to him. Also, he led them to 2 finals appearances, Bulls, Pistons. Did not win either of them. Did not become a champion until he went to the Rockets, but still kept them in the mix. Damian Lillard, great player, but I don't think he's done enough for this team to be in that go position quite yet.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you wholeheartedly on this one. Portland Trailblazers have one championship. It's in 1977 where they defeated Dr. J in his first year with the 76ers. That was the Bill Walton-led Portland Trailblazers. But again, Walton off injured. Didn't spend many years in Portland as much as Portland expected. Damian Lillard is one of my favorite players in the NBA. one of the best players to play with in a video game too. But I agree, it's Clyde Drexler. 8 All-Star seasons with Portland, the team's all-time leading scorer, um, member of the Dream Team while he was with the Portland Trailblazers. Consistently one of the league's top scorers and the scoring leaders. And like you said, helped lead the Portland Trailblazers to 2 NBA Finals appearances in 1990 against the Bad Boy Pistons, where they lost, I believe, 4-1, and then in '92 where they lost to Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls, in 6 games. So there's no one else for me in Clyde other than Clyde Drexler. For me, Dame has only been to 1 conference finals, maybe 2. Hasn't got over the hump. Maybe in a couple years we say it's Damian Lillard, but for now it's still Clyde Drexler all day long.
Absolutely. Agreed.
All right. Next on our list, and this one may be a little difficult, but maybe it might be an easy answer, is the Sacramento Kings. Now, the Sacramento Kings franchise has bounced around a couple different towns, including Kansas City, but they've been in Sacramento for quite some time here. Bleacher Report has Oscar Robertson as that team's GOAT. Montana, is it the Big O, or do you have somebody else like, please don't tell me Doug Christie?
I'm going to stick with the Big O. I totally agree with this pick. He is the franchise leader in 5 different categories. When you see a guy lead the franchise in 5 different categories of the game, that just indicates to me that they're the GOAT. Also, the Kings are another organization that has not seen a lot of success. He was obviously in a way different era of basketball, but he was doing things back then that would still be impressive today. So I'm giving it to Oscar Robertson, and that's not even close. Obviously, you could say, there's a couple other players up there, Mitch Richmond, Bobby Wasner, Chris Webber, but it's definitely the Big O by far. So yeah, I don't think there's really anyone else. Again, he's the franchise leader in 5 different categories, and they're 5 pretty impressive categories that I'm shocked none of them have been broken yet. So he's definitely the guy for that organization.
Yeah, unfortunately for Kings fans, the Big O got a championship ring, but it was in Milwaukee with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Yeah, look, I think this is a pretty simple one. There's been a lot of good players that have passed through Sacramento since 2000. I have a couple names written down. There's Chris Webber, Peja Stojakovic, one of my favorite international players of all time. Mitch Richmond, who's I think 3rd in all time in scoring for the Kings. The best flopper in all time, or the biggest flopper in Vlade Divac. But I'm going to go with the Big O, Oscar Robertson. Before Russell Westbrook came along, he was the only player in NBA history to average a triple-double for a season, and he wasn't even the MVP in that year. Just to show how crazy it was in the NBA in 1961, 1962. But yeah, no, Big O, couldn't agree with you more on the lack of success from the Sacramento Kings franchise. Even though, that's maybe in a future podcast, we talk about the best teams that never won it. Top of the list for me is the 2001-2002 Sacramento Kings,
Absolutely.
where I think they should have beat the Lakers in that 7-game series. I still have nightmares of Peja Stojakovic airballing that 3-pointer when they were tied at 100. Then after that, Kobe and Shaq took over. But anyway, Oscar Robertson for me, pretty simple. Let's move on. Next team is the San Antonio Spurs. I think this one's going to be a pretty simple one. San Antonio has been around since the ABA days, one of the 4 teams from the ABA that is still with the NBA. Bleacher Report has Tim Duncan as that team's GOAT, one of the best power forwards of all time. Any issues with the big fundamental Montana? We put in somebody else.
There's no one even close. This is another organization with a player that is just up here and every other player is down here. That doesn't mean there's not other legendary players that have been through. Obviously they've had a lot of success, but I'm going to give it to Tim Duncan because within all of their success, there was one guy who was running the show and on every single championship winning team in this Spurs dynasty, and that would be Tim Duncan. He was consistently putting up impressive numbers. He was consistently shutting down some of the best players in the NBA. So I'm going to give it to Tim Duncan. And again, there are a few other players that I may have thought about briefly, but when I really sat down and thought about the greatest of all time for this organization, it's him by far.
Yeah, and this is another one where we say it's not even close. There's Tim Duncan and everybody else. I mean, a couple of other names you can write down: David Robinson, George Gervin. They do have a couple of other Hall of Famers in Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker is going to be going in the Hall of Fame pretty soon. Maybe the gap isn't that much between Tim Duncan and David Robinson, the Iceman, but there's a pretty big gap there. So, yeah, for me, Tim Duncan, one of the greatest, if not the greatest power forward of all time, spent his entire career, which seemed like forever, with the San Antonio Spurs organization. So, yeah, no, it's definitely Tim Duncan. All three of us agree with that, including Bleacher Report. All right. This one had me scratching my head at first, but then, I really had to dig into the rationale here. But the next team on our list is the Toronto Raptors. Been in the NBA since 1995. Had, a few great players pass through that organization as well. This one was a little tougher than I thought, but Bleacher Report has Kyle Lowry as that team's GOAT. You agreeing with that, or who do you have as that team's GOAT, Montana?
So this was a tricky one for me because we've seen legendary players such as Vince Carter come in and just be incredible. Vince Carter was so fun to watch on that team. Kyle Lowry was obviously with them through that championship run, but I'm going to give it to Kawhi Leonard. And this is the only player that I can look at as a one and done with a team and put them up there as the GOAT. He only played one season with the Raptors. He's probably wishing he would have signed an extension and not just played 1 year. Obviously, he went to the Clippers after that and has not seen quite as much success as he did with that Raptors team. But Kawhi Leonard came there and in his first season led them to an NBA championship against the Golden State Warriors, that three-headed monster who nobody thought was ever going to lose a championship again. Obviously, Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson went down with injuries in that series, but the Raptors fought, and I don't think anyone really saw the Raptors winning that title, even with Kawhi Leonard on that team. So Kawhi Leonard went to that Raptors team and did it all for them. He was doing things on both sides of the ball. He hit that clutch shot against the 76ers that's made one of the most iconic sports photos in history. So, I mean, Kawhi Leonard all day for me. And again, this is the only one and done player on this GOAT list. And the only reason that he makes that spot is he came into that team and he cemented himself as that GOAT, helping bolster them from a mid playoff exit to a champion in his one season there. And that's special. That is incredibly special. So I'm giving it to Kawhi Leonard all day.
So no Andre Bargnani for you, huh? No, no Damon Stoudemire. No. Look, I gave my credentials for a team's GOAT and a GOAT in general. I'm gonna throw a couple names out at you as other ones that I considered. And this one was probably one of the more tricky ones for me as well, just because the Raptors had that one championship season where they beat Golden State, as you said. But the names I wrote down were DeMar DeRozan, who's the franchise all-time leading scorer, multi-time All-Star. Kyle Lowry, has been with the Raptors franchise, probably the longest of anybody, I believe. His number will be retired in Toronto as well. There's Chris Bosh, who was a multi-time All-Star 2010 guy before he left for Miami. Raptors didn't really make it far in the playoffs with Chris Bosh, so it's hard for me to pick him, even though when he left, he was the franchise all-time leader in a bunch of different categories. There's one of my favorite players in the last 20 years, Vince Carter, multi-time All-Star. To me, one of the top three, if not the top dunker in the history of the in-game dunker and slam dunk contest dunker of all time. I'm going against everything I believe in as far as the criteria for the GOAT. And I'm going to agree with you again. It's Kawhi Leonard. He's the one guy that played for one season for a franchise that they'll erect a statue in Toronto for, because making that trade for trading DeMar DeRozan for Kawhi Leonard and Kawhi Leonard being healthy and in a contract year, and the impact he had on that team, on that city, finally getting the Raptors over the hump. That was all Kawhi Leonard. Granted, there are other pieces to the team. Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam's coming out party, etc. But they have one championship, and they haven't come close since. So, yeah, I mean, longevity, awards, and all that stuff, I have to throw that out the window just because of that one championship and that impact that the man had. So I hate that I'm naming a GOAT that's only played for a team for one season, but it's Kawhi Leonard. So Bleacher Report, you got some explaining to do here. All right. Two teams left, I believe. The Utah Jazz. This one was tough for me. Surprisingly tough. I think there's one of two names that most people would pick and argue with. Bleacher Report went with John Stockton. Montana, is John Stockton who you had as the Utah Jazz GOAT, or is there another name that you penned in?
Well, so the other name that comes to mind right off the bat is Karl Malone. Malone and Stockton obviously teamed up together and gave that Utah Jazz team some of the most exciting, seasons that they've ever seen. Obviously, they never quite finished their climb up to the mountaintop, never got that title together, but they put up insane video game numbers together and had many successful years. Malone is definitely second for me, but I'm going to keep Stockton. I agree with that pick. I think you take Stockton off of that team and off of that, franchise history, and I think it's not the same at all. Malone, great player, obviously very talented in his own right, but John Stockton was leading that team into battle every game, and his impact on the court shows with his assist numbers. By far, I mean, one of the greatest people to ever pass that ball, one of the greatest guards, and so much speed and so much, durability. I think Stockton is still in that spot, but Malone is right there for me. So I agree with Bleacher Report, but I can also see people picking Malone just because of who he is.
Yeah, I don't think there's many other people you can put in this conversation other than Stockton and Malone. Those two guys are always and forever going to be linked, right? I went back and forth. Karl Malone is he is the third leading scorer in NBA history with over 36,000 points. One of Malone's greatest traits, and something that I talk about all the time on our podcast, is availability and his durability. Malone was always there. Consistent 20 and 10 guy, heck, 25 and 10 guy through the duration of his career. I, with you, went with the person that Steve Kerr once referred to as a dirty, dirty bastard on one of the NBA Old Court episodes, and that's John Stockton. The man played just as long, I think, one additional season in Utah. Stockton got there in '84. Karl Malone got there in '85. Basically played together their whole careers, with the exception of one or two seasons. Stockton almost had 20,000 points for his NBA career, but John Stockton, while he doesn't have any MVP awards, has consecutive assist championships. He is the NBA's all-time leader in both assists and steals. That's two categories. The same number of NBA finals as Karl Malone. They were teammates, two less MVPs. I get that. But he was the point guard. He was the one that set the table. He was the one that that established the pick and roll and assisted on a lot of those 36,000 points that Karl Malone had. Better defender than Karl Malone. Karl Malone, obviously, great player, one of the best power forwards of all time. But I agree with both you and Bleacher Report. It's John Stockton for me. So, all right, the 30th and final team, and I'm doing a double check just to make sure I still know the alphabet here, is the Washington Wizards. And we're going to go all the way back to the Bullets days as well. The Washington NBA franchise has been around for quite some time. This one was a head scratcher to me, one of the biggest head scratchers that stuck out to me here. Bleacher Report has Gilbert Arenas. Montana, I can already see you shaking your head here. So who do you have as the GOAT of the Washington Wizards?
I think this was my biggest surprise when I saw this on the list. Obviously, Gilbert Arenas, great player, but I'm going to go with Elvin Hayes, one of the most talented, if not the most talented players in his time. Obviously, I think in the 70s he really kind of set the bar pretty high and kind of elevated his position. Also an NBA champion with this organization. So, brought that NBA championship home to this team in 1978 and put up pretty consistent and great numbers in his time. In his time, he was 21 points per game, 12.5 rebounds per game, and 2 blocks per game. Those numbers are really solid nowadays, but when he was playing the sport, those were just insanely dominating numbers. So he was putting up plenty of points, and then he was bringing down plenty of boards, and was just a huge threat on both sides of the ball. So I'm giving it to Elvin Hayes. Gilbert Arenas, again, great player, but I would not even put his name on a list of players for GOAT for this organization. So that was a little bit head scratching, but I guess I can see maybe why he's on there, but I really can't at the same time. So I'm giving it to Hayes though overall.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. This one and the Damian Lillard pick for Portland were the ones that jumped out at me, where I was kind of having one of those WTF moments. No, I do not have Gilbert Arenas as my Wizards GOAT. A couple names came to mind. Elvin Hayes is on my list. Bradley Bill's on my list, although he doesn't have that championship. He, not going very far in the playoffs. John Wall's on the list. But for me, it came down to Elvin Hayes and Wes Unseld. Some trivia for you. I believe Wes Unseld is the only player in NBA history, at least the last player in NBA history, to win the Rookie of the Year and MVP in the same season. Him and Elvin Hayes were teammates on that 78 Bullets championship. But I'm in agreement with you once again. I'm giving it to Elvin Hayes. Wes Unseld was just as much of an important player, able to do those full court passes, a big time rebounder, and helped free up some of the space for Elvin Hayes to go to work. Elvin Hayes is one of the best power forwards of all time, but completely agree with you. It's Elvin Hayes, and in my book, the numbers stick out, impact sticks out. Wes Unseld is a very close second, but for me, that is Elvin Hayes. So overall, just going through the stats here, a lot of the picks Bleacher Report we agreed with, but there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I'm counting the ones that you and I didn't necessarily agree with. Montana, actually, I'm sorry, 10 picks that we didn't agree with. So I guess Bleacher Report did a good job on 2/3. The other third left our heads scratching, but overall, great list, great conversation. And again, like we said before, over the next 3 to 5 years, and maybe as much as 10 years, if we were to do this again, these names might look completely different. So we shall see. Well, that wraps up part 2 of our 2-part special series on each team's NBA GOATs. In our opinions, we've challenged the Bleacher Report list that they had taken out or released a few weeks ago. So appreciate everyone watching in Montana. You have another podcast that you work on. We didn't plug it in part 1. I think now is a good time. So you want to plug your podcast real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is at the Connor and Heffernan Show. We just kind of cover a bunch of different kind of sports. We go over baseball, basketball, football, hockey, just a little bit of everything. You can find us on Amazon Music or Spotify or Podbean at the Connor and Heffernan Show. Still figuring out YouTube and Apple Music, but hopefully one of these days I can switch what I'm saying about those and actually plug them and not say we're still waiting on them. But so yeah, at the Connor and Heffernan Show on Spotify, Podbean, and Amazon Music.
All right. And also I have a sports blog called thesportspageblog.com. Be sure to check out some of those entries on there. I've been releasing at least 3 to 4 entries per month, all sports, not just basketball. We touch baseball, hockey, and football as well. So be sure to check that out. Well, thanks again for joining us on our 2 parts special with Beyond the Arc and naming every team's GOATs. I'll be working on the alphabet in the meantime, and don't forget to subscribe and check us out for new episodes, not just of Well Beyond the Arc, but the other podcasts on the Yankee and the Brit Sports Network. So take care, everyone.